Hi everybody. I'm going to show you how I apply this piece of material to the back of the neck of the guitar. This is called a backstrap, or sometimes I've heard it called a swallowtail. And my first encounter with this kind of neck reinforcing scheme was on banjos from roughly the turn of the century, American banjos. And I think it is an American musical instrument making detail. I haven't been able to see any examples from the European builders. Let's trace, at least my understanding of it would be that the banjo was really an African instrument that came across with the enslaved people. I think they first were made from a stick and a gourd, and then they evolved into being a bent piece of material with a skin head on it. And as the banjo evolved, it went from a very lightweight instrument to a heavier and heavier instrument until by the turn of the 19th and 20th century, banjos had gotten pretty darn heavy and full of metal rings. And then they got resonators to try and make them louder. At any rate, what happened was, and I'm sorry I don't have one in my shop to throw on the bench, but we'll give you some photographs to look at here so you can see what the banjo builders were doing 100 and something years ago. The idea was to try and keep the headstocks from breaking off the banjos. After all, the banjo is quite narrow and even weaker than a guitar neck here at the nut. And as the pots, as the round part of the banjo, the pot, got heavier and heavier, the potential for breakage and accidents went up. And pretty much all of the builders responded by installing backstraps on the banjos. Many of them were this style, the long style, as you can see in the photographs. And some of them were kind of parallel like this one, and some of them were more pointy like this one. Let's have a look at what they actually do in terms of strengthening the instrument. So if this is a piece of material that's sawn from one big chunk, as a lot of these instruments were, they came to be in America. In Europe, a lot of times the headstocks were stuck on with a V-joint or some other way. In America, especially in manufacturing, they tended to be sawn from large pieces of material. So that meant that the grain was running in this direction. Without reinforcement, it's pretty easy to see how the instrument can fracture in a place like this. The backstrap was added to help reinforce this area of the instrument so that this couldn't happen. This would be a kind of a smallish backstrap, so maybe something like this guitar neck over here, where we would hope that this comes down far enough to be, part of the solution here. Maybe it does. Kind of depends on how the hit is taken and exactly what angle the grain makes in the neck. And then this is another variation that's been popular for a long time. It's supposed to look slick and fancy and everything. I'm not sure that this really helps that much. And I think that you can see that there's still quite an opportunity for the material to split in this neighborhood without the benefit of a long piece of material that's helping to give this area of the instrument some elasticity and resistance to cracking if it gets a blow or an impact. Of course, one of the things you can do to reduce this problem is to use a very small headstock angle. So the angles on the instruments that I build are about 4 or 5 degrees headstock angle, and regular normal instruments are probably more like 15 degrees-ish, a Gibson style instrument. would be about a 15-degree headstock angle or something like that. We can see here that this piece of material, this is about not quite 2 millimeters thick, about 75 thousandths. Pretty substantial piece of hard material. This is snakewood. It's bent here at this very small angle. I don't need to pre-bend it. I can just clamp it down and glue it, and it works great. And I'll show you how that happens in the next segment. Let me also comment on its utility as a repair technique, which I think is fantastic. I have performed this as a repair technique many times in my career, particularly when you get a headstock like this one, which had been broken off at least a couple of times and re-glued as best it could be. Still, it doesn't really make things that much better to glue them back on. Sometimes they're even more vulnerable to being broken afterwards, depending on how the repair goes. And I know that there is a school of thought that says that you route a couple of long slots in here. I first saw this in Hideo Kamimoto's book from the 1970s. He encouraged us to route a couple of slots in here and fill them with matching material. I don't feel that that's really a very good repair technique. Of course, the ends of the part are not particularly strongly bonded to the rest of the neck. I just don't think it's that great a repair. This is far superior, in my opinion. On this piece, I used quite a big chunk of material. The thickness here, it's probably, I don't know, 2.5 millimeters or 100 thousandths thick. Brazilian rosewood, this one is. Precisely fitted to a flat area I made on the neck with a little flip at the end. So there's a curve here where the two parts have to fit, and it's a little bit of a trick to do this. I bonded this on with epoxy, and then I managed to be careful enough in shaving it down, that I didn't even have to touch up the finish on the neck. This is the original finish on the neck for this guitar. So this worked out great, and I don't know if I can guarantee that this would never break, but boy, I don't know what it would take. I mean, I think everything else would be broken before this would. This is massively strong reinforcement for this part of the neck. Well, I believed for a long time that the rigidity of the neck and the headstock are really important to the sound of the guitar. What you do not want is a large, heavy headstock that's wiggling around on its own and doing some separate dance that's subtracting from the total energy that you have in the instrument in order to make sound. And one way to combat that problem is to make the neck stiff. And this certainly is a wonderful way to help stiffen this part of the neck, which can be weakened not only by the small size of the neck here, where the neck has the smallest amount of volume, but at least in steel string guitars, there's also quite often an excavation on this side of the nut in order to put in the truss rod and the truss rod wrench access, and a whole giant piece of material gets cut away in here, particularly in a Gibson design, right where you need it to help hold everything together. There's a big chunk of material that's removed. Sometimes this can be a huge help to an instrument, and I remember on one occasion gluing back together a shattered Gibson ES-335 with an ebony backstrap, a substantial piece of material I put back here, and the customer came in and picked up the guitar and played it and looked at me astonished and said, "This is my guitar?" And in fact, the guitar had been greatly improved by this backstrap, and the thing just sounded much better, and it sounded more even and had better sustain. So we know that this is a wonderful thing to help reinforce this part of the neck and give it stiffness and strength. Apart from that, It's a great visual detail, it looks slick. You know, it's not really a job that's easy to do. This is, you know, real kind of a professional series of tricks that gets you here, whether you do it by hand or with the assistance of machinery the way I do. But at any rate, I'll be looking forward to the next show where I'll show you how this all lines up, how it works, how I do it, and how you might be able to do it too. Thanks. Here we are trying to get this backstrap happening here. And here's the ebony part I'm going to cut to fit the new neck. We're going to cut a curve on this part, and I'll explain to you why. A little curved surface right down here, a precisely curved surface. So this is the look that I like to go for. This is what I've chosen as the design detail for my guitar. So sides are parallel-ish, and then the end is a kind of a half round look. I think it's a nice strong look, comfortable. But it's not the only look that you could have with this reinforcement. If you look at some of the banjo examples online, you'll see that many of them are more like this, tapered shape with a little rounded end. And as you can imagine, the shape of this and the proportions of this have to do with several things geometrically. One of them would be how the neck is shaped. So if you had a more of a V neck, this end would be sharper as a result. But to create this look, we have to do something really different. We have to curve the piece of veneer somehow from here where it's wide to here at the end. And in order to do that, we have basically two options. One is to bend it into that curve, and the other would be to cut it, which is what I've decided to do in my current work. So I used to bend these and found that it was more problematic than cutting, although, as I'll show you, the cutting isn't particularly simple. But anyway, I'm going to cut this curve, and the curve is going to be just at the end of this part, as I said, from where it's the widest to the end. And what that's going to be, the way I do it, is a 2-inch diameter arc. So it's a 1-inch radius that will fit the curve of this piece of wood to a curve I'm going to cut in the back of the neck shape. And then here I've drawn, this is what you would do if you wanted it to come out like this. You wouldn't put a curve at all, you just have it come out straight. And then the end of it would be tapered like this one, and it would be a smaller diameter radius at the end, depending again on how you shape the neck. I hope that's clear. In order to get parallel sides and a big rounded end, you have to do something to the end of it here to shape it to fit the material that you cut away from the back side of the neck. Okay? Hope that's clear. You could also do it the other way. I did a couple of times where the end of this is actually wider than it is here. In order to do that, you have to reduce the thickness of the reinforcing backstrap over here. And I decided I didn't like the look, and I didn't like the idea of making it weaker. So this is my final my final shape, all right? Now I'm going to cut it first, and then I'll take the setup apart and show you how it works. So here's a part that's going to end up on the back of the instrument neck, and so I'm going to put it in this way, cut the gluing surface, put it in here in the milling machine against this fixture. I have a piece of thin double-sided tape underneath this, which I hope is going to hold this down. This is a sanding disc that I've fixed at the right height. I'm going to set it spinning in this direction so that it throws the dust to the back of the machine. Right now. I'll move it over to the right place. And I'm going to move this block. You can see there's a little angled surface here. It's going to help me get started on the cut. And we hear it stop cutting. That's the end of it. Pretty simple. Seemed to work fine. So let's have a look at how this works, and I'll take this apart and show you about this tool and the setup. Well, first we'll get the part off. This ebony is about 2 millimeters thick, or 80 thousandths. Here I think we can show you what this looks like. Made a little tiny mark over here, but I can't even really feel it with my fingernail, so that's okay. So that's a pretty good cut across the grain there. I have to play with it a little bit. Now I'll show you the metal tool. So the way this works is the center of this bolt is 1 inch away from the cutting surface. And so when this is rotated, it describes 2-inch diameter arc and cuts the ebony part just the way we want to. Not a particularly simple solution. I did it by hand for many years, either by cutting it or bending it, and yeah, I'm glad this is working well now. Helps me get the result I want with a little bit less trouble. So, preparing the backstrap. Okay, so I have sanded this fingerboard gluing surface to my satisfaction. It has a slight curvature in the back bow direction, you would call it. And then the front of the headstock surface is also sanded. Now it's stuck down to the top of the vise with some double-sided tape. And I'm going to take a cut on the back of this, which will trim the laminate I just put on here, the J-strip laminate, and get this the right thickness. And then the next part we're going to do is make this cut in the back of the neck for the back strap itself, all right? So I'll take a bunch of little cuts. Okay, well, it came out great. So we've got a nice parallel surface here. And see the laminations of the J-strip. All right, so next cut will be on the backstrap itself. All right, so now we have come to the part of the project where we're going to cut 70 thousandths of material off the back of this in a straight flat surface with a little shape at the end, a little flip to match the cut that we've made on the backstrap veneer. This is a job that for quite a while I did by hand with chisels and files and scrapers and sandpaper. And I finally decided that I had better things to do with my time, and I wanted to clean up this part of the process. So I employed the master spindle sander, and I'm going to walk you through how this works. So a little bit of custom fixturing on this. So first of all, if you haven't been introduced to this, is the master, and that's no kidding. It's a 2-speed oscillating sander with the entertaining feature, and it's the only one of its kind that has this, of being able to turn the oscillations on and off. So having the oscillations on distributes the wear on the sandpaper and allows you to cut a little faster, and turning the oscillations off may give you a little bit better finish, sometimes at least. This is a machinist setup block from who knows when, an old one. And I've cut it away here so that I could put in a screw with a little brass pad on it. And this allows me to regulate the angle of the neck relative to the travel by adjusting this corner so that the fixture rides over here, and then again on this adjustable edge here, like this. And then this fastener is what moves the fence towards the cutter and engages the work and deepens the cut. As we back this out, it cuts more. And then there are 2 stops here that bump up against the cast iron box. One of them to stop it at the business end of the backstrap, the length of it, and this other one to prevent it from cutting too far towards the headstock. So still, when all is done, I still have to clean up the surface, the transitional little swooping surface between the angle of this back of the headstock, which we just cut, and the surface that the backstrap is going to glue to. So I have to make this transition just with hand tools and have it come out, really nice so that it looks pretty. I guess I'm ready to go. I'm going to start out with, I don't know what this is. It doesn't say, but maybe it's, I don't know, 120 grit or something like that, 150 grit. By the way, the way this works is that the bottom of the mandrel, which is, precisely made, there's a knurl which is tapered a tiny bit in this direction, so that when you push the sandpaper down on there, the knurl grabs the sandpaper and drives it and lets you either change the grit or change the sleeve for some, if it wears out, or to just switch it around and use the other end of it. Very convenient, as you can see. So I have played around with this angular adjustment a little bit I think it's reasonably good, I guess. But we'll find out as we cut whether I did it right or not. And we can make an adjustment accordingly, okay? So I'm gonna let the fence travel towards the sanding cutter. Let's just see if we can. Okay, so that seems like it's pretty close. So anyway, here we go. Okay, well, we're partway there. Here's the limit of our backstrap part we're going to use for this guitar. So we can see I need to move this this stop at this end. I set it conservatively, so I don't have to worry about it in this first part. And I think you can see maybe that there is you can see evidence of the amount that the carbon is tapering off. You remember when we laid up the carbon in the first, I don't know, 10 inches or so, I cut down the carbon fiber so there's less and less as it goes towards this end of the neck in order to give this end of the neck some flexibility in order to respond to different string gauges and tensions. So now we're going to just have a quick look here at the width, and we can see that it might be a little wider here than it is here. So that means we're going to make an adjustment over here so that it cuts a little bit less on that end. And then the other thing I've done is, before we got started, I set this pair of calipers for a 0 here, and we can go in here and take a measurement to see how much we've taken off. Gosh, we're very, very close to our right number. It says 74 thousandths, just under 2 millimeters. Now, some of this material needs to get sanded off. We have a little bit of this linen artifact here, so this is a little thicker than we'll need it. And I'll need to extend the cut down here, and we'll need to take just a tiny little bit, maybe another, I don't know, 5 thousandths off, something like that, in order to complete this cut. And then the rest of this we'll do by hand. Okay. Let's check in here and see what this looks like. Oh yeah, and then I also need to move this way to pick up this extra length. It should be all right. Okay, so we're at 85 thou, just over 2 millimeters. So that's probably just about right. And got a tiny little gap here between our mark and the cut. But I believe that we have we have plenty of material for this. I think we'll call that close enough. We'll just shift this down here a tiny, like not even a millimeter. Well, might seem like a lot of fuss for a little cut, but it really works out beautifully. Next thing is to get this fit properly and address this little blob here of extra material and get a nice curve so that it looks pretty. And this will help, it'll cover up the termination of this veneer and just kind of make this whole part of the instrument look pretty magical and beautiful. Well, at least in one man's opinion.